So I want to clarify a few things. First of all, if you cannot currently see that, and I know that's difficult, but as a general rule, see that, move forward, okay? Because there's going to be a lot of stuff you're going to need to see, and I can't make it much bigger than a 70-inch TV can make it, okay? So if you have a hard time at this point seeing or hearing, there's room up here, guys, if you want it, or two over there. So pile on in here. See, we scared them off. Scared them off already. Just seeing Hurt Line did it. Yeah. So I want to get that straight right from the beginning. If you can't see this stuff, you're going to miss a whole lot. And I don't want you just going, well, I couldn't see that, so I have no idea what he was talking about. Move up. Okay, so if that's what you need to do, move up. We already had one brave soul say, I can't, so I'm going to move up here so I can see and hear. All right, not that I'm making assumptions with this group about seeing and hearing. However, second thing, this is not a class concerned or pointing towards today's particular political events in the Middle East. And it is not a conversation about end times. So we are talking specifically about the origins of the conflict between the peoples in the Middle East, or the Holy Land in particular. Now, I put up here, and you'll see in this as we're talking, the Arab-Israeli conflict. It's a bit of a misnomer, and it's going to take some explanation as to why that's a misnomer. A lot of this has to do with the particular heritage of everybody. So genealogy may be the most important thing about these conversations. The genealogy of people may be the most important conversation we have about this. So if you grasp two things out of these sessions that we're going to have together, the two things will be genealogy and geography. Okay? So let's all say it together, genealogy and geography, okay? And so what we're going to do is we're going to try to take a biblical perspective on these two items and what the sources are, the origins are for this conflict that's going on over there. Now, we will also delve into not just the biblical sources, but the other sources. For example, we will look into some verse from Quran, and some other sources as well, some other Arabic writings, some other Semitic, other types of writings. But today is very important because I want to establish where this origin of this conflict comes from. So we're going to look, hopefully today we'll get through, or throughout the class, we're going to look specifically at three sources for the conflict. Number one being Noah's sons. Number two, the Abrahamic epic. I just call it that way. The story of Abraham, and then we're going to talk about quote-unquote Palestine. And the reason why I put it in quotes is something you're going to have to find out here shortly, but this is not just a simple, easy conversation, okay? There's a lot of stuff that goes into this conflict. So, next thing I want to do is I want to establish just some understanding, I like my pointer, some understanding as to where we are on the map that we're talking about, okay? So let's start over here, and this is an ancient map. This is the early Christian church in the Roman Empire, so that just gives us an idea, and I'll point some other places out to you. So all the way over here is basically Morocco into Portugal and Spain, France, Italy, and then you move into Greece and all these other countries that surround here, and then into Turkey. Then you're looking at Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and into Israel, currently Israel, Saudi Arabia. This is the Arabian Peninsula. This is the Sinai Peninsula. Everybody knows about Sinai, right? Then over into Egypt and Libya. Okay? So that takes the tour, the quick tour, all the way around this, what we call the Mediterranean. Over in this direction, you'll start to run into Iraq and Iran, and down at the bottom would be places like Kuwait. Okay? So that's a rough overview. I want to take a little bit of time to thank the Hillsborough Church of Christ for this rack of maps. We've already had the conversation here that I'm a bit of a map geek anyway. So knowing the geography and both the geology as well regarding this, we'll look at some of the topography as to why certain places are important, not just the fact that they're dirt, they're specific dirt in specific places. So anyway, I just wanted to give you an idea about if I make reference to Greece or Turkey or something like that, or I say they were in this area, like here's Cappadocia, and I'll say Cappadocia, and so I'll point that's in the area of Turkey. So you give an idea of what we're talking about today, where those places are today. Okay? All right. So with all of that in preface, what would you say the origin of this conflict is?
Sin.
Okay, that's probably pretty good. Sin is the statement that was made. Sin.
Humans.
And that's actually pretty doggone correct. But we'll get into a more detailed part of that. So where would you say the origin comes from of this conflict? What would be the most common thought as to where this origin comes from?
Well, I would always put it back to Abraham's two sons.
Okay, so the most common thought about this is right here, Ishmael and Isaac. That we think this is where the conflict begins. Wrong! No, I'm kidding. I want to say that one time throughout the event. So no, actually, it is not where this conflict begins. And I know that sounds weird because we've all been told that the conflict is over the heir to Abraham's promise or covenant, right? So that's why we think the Abrahamic epic is really the source of all this. But you'll see right up above source number 2, what do I have? Noah. The conflict begins with the sons of Noah. Okay? So where do we start? Where do we find where this origin is and who are the players? Well, we're going to start, just like we talked, with the sons of Noah. And the sons of Noah are?
Ham, Shem, and Japheth.
There you go. She got it. And we wrote it down too. And that story is in Genesis chapter 9 and 10. It goes on beyond that, but the main part of that story is in Genesis chapter 9 and Genesis chapter 10. We're going to talk about all of this following the flood. So let's think for just a minute. Who is everyone related to in some form or fashion? Adam, right?
Then Noah.
Yeah. But we know for sure that Noah, right. And so all of us come from one of 3 sons of Noah. So I want to establish those things. We're going to look at, and I think this will just kind of, I hate to say it'll blow your mind, but to look at how the map is guided by the sons of Noah and where we all stand today as a result. If we look at the epic in Genesis chapter 9, verse 10, or chapter 10 as well. So what happens is God and Noah make a promise to each other. We get the covenant, the rainbow, and all the promise that goes along. And one day, Noah decides to go get drunk and lay down naked in his tent. Now, I don't know if he decided to lay down naked in his tent drunk, but that's the way it worked. So he falls asleep after drinking, and he falls asleep in his tent unclothed. Now, one of the things we need to understand is when someone says unclothed in the Bible, it doesn't necessarily mean without a stitch of clothing on. Okay? There were layers of garments, and so it is a possibility that he was not fully clothed. Now, the story that and you can see here, the art will say, oh, he was naked because the artist who drew this was, they glamorized the naked body at a certain point in time. The Renaissance, but they weren't there, so they don't know. And we have these pictures of these guys in these ornate costumes, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, and it's probably not the case either. So it's a poor representation, but it was kind of a neat photo because it had all 3 guys in there and it had them in the sheet and everything like that. So the story basically goes, if you look in chapter 9, he falls asleep and he's drunk in his tent, Noah is, and the tent door is open. That's the other issue. So Ham comes along and sees, he's the youngest, comes along and he sees his father passed out, drunk and naked in the tent. And what does he do? He runs off to his brothers. Hey guys, Dad's naked and drunk in the tent. And what do the older brothers do? They're angry. They're upset. And they say, they're thinking to themselves, why didn't you remedy that? Why didn't you do something about that? Why did you just come and tell us and giggle about your naked dad in the tent? And so they grab a sheet, and as you can see in the picture, they hold it between them and back up into the tent to cover their father so that they didn't put their eyes upon their dad in that situation and therefore dishonor him. So this one thing Ham does, this is a sin. And in their culture, it was a terrible sin to dishonor or disrespect their father after all he had done. And Ham does this. Well, at some point in time, Noah wakes up from this stupor, this drunken bit. He wakes up and he finds out what happened. And when he finds out what happens, he's upset. And he not only is upset, but this is what happens. We'll talk about this first. Genesis chapter 9, verse 18 and 19. The sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. Keep that in mind. Okay? These were the three sons of Noah, and from them came all the people, or the people who were scattered over the whole earth. And so I'm going to give you a quick breakdown of the immediate genealogy of the three, and we'll look at them a little bit further. So if you look over here, we'll start with Ham. So you have some names here: Cush, Put, Canaan, Nimrod, Jebusite, Amorite, Hivite, Girgasite. And then from beyond that, it says the world systems in this becomes Babylon, Egypt, North Africa, Syria, and Jordan. And then I want to go over here to Japheth, and also all of these were polytheistic peoples. Japheth, out of Japheth you get Gomer, Magog, Javan, Tubal, and Meshech. From that you get the world systems in Europe, Russia, Iran, and Iraq. Shem is the source of monotheism, not immediately with Shem, but down the line. You get Terah and his descendants. From Terah's descendants, who was Terah's immediate descendant? His son. A guy by the name of Abraham. So, Shem begins the line that gets to Abraham. Abraham begets the line that ends to Jesus. So from that we get what are called the Semitic peoples. Those are Jews and Arabs. Okay? So I want to stop there for just a second. When we hear about anti-Semitism, it's really interesting that anti-Semitism can often be directed only towards the Jews. And that's what we hear, right? But the fact is, Semites come from Shem. And the descendants of Shem, we'll look a little bit further, also include the Arabs. So when people say somebody is anti-Semitic, or if an Arab or a Muslim Arab is anti-Semitic, they're against themselves. They're speaking against themselves. They're Semites. And so you have the Semite languages, and one of the Semite languages is Arabic. You have Arabic, Aramaic, Hebrew, and a couple others as well. So that's kind of the basis of the system from Noah and his sons. Now, Ham's sin, as we read here in Genesis chapter 9, verse 24. Let's talk about that. Noah awoke from his wine. That was a very nice way to put it, wasn't it? He awoke from his wine and knew that his younger son, what his younger son had done unto him. And he said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren." And he said, "Blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant." Okay? Are you starting to catch some things that are happening where the conflict kind of begins? Well, it's the one thing that none of us really want to do. Be a servant. Do what everybody else tells us to do, right? We're not big fans of being told what to do. So the curse is not necessarily for Ham. Now, I want to talk about this real quickly. If somebody does something to me, I generally can take it. But if someone does an attack on my family, say for instance someone were to say, "Hey, I'm going to put a curse on your son," now I'm mad. Now I'm upset. because I want to protect my son. I want to protect my family. And so Noah puts this curse upon Canaan, the oldest son of Ham. Okay? And he says that the people of Shem, the descendants of Shem, will be basically the ruler over them, and the descendants of Ham will be the servants. Now, if we look at history, we find that's not always the case, but I think we're talking about a bigger picture here. Because the descendants of Ham end up, I showed you in some of the places, right? One of those places being Egypt, Iraq and Iran. Well, tell me about some of the empires over the years that have been in Egypt and Iraq and Iran. Egypt, the pharaohs. And just so happens that shortly after Abraham leaves this earth, where does Abraham's descendants end up for 400 years? Egypt, in the land of Ham, Cush. Okay? So they end up in that area, or there's another one for that too. I'll tell you that in a second. So end up in that land. They're slaves to them for 400 years. Where else do they go? Who else are they captured by? The Assyrians and the Babylonians, Medes, the Persians. There's Medes. You got to watch out for them. I'm just telling you right now. You got to watch out for the Medes. The Medes and the Persians. Where are those people at?
On the other side.
Iraq and Iran. Okay? Out in Mesopotamia. So that's not always the case that they're quote-unquote servants, but what we find out is that God's chosen people come from what line? Shem. Not from Ham. Ham's descendants are cursed. Okay? So we got any questions so far?
Shem was firstborn to Noah.
Shem was the oldest. Yeah. Ham was the youngest. Japheth's the middle child, so he gets nothing, right? Middle children, I'll tell you what. Anyway.
Well, that's was going to. So Japheth is just kind of hanging around.
Yeah, and so we'll that was good. Very good. I like the segue. It's good. All right, so let's look around here a little bit and see where everybody went. Japheth, we'll start with him because he's the middle child. Nobody cares, right? So from him, the descendants are Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan. There's going to be a test on how to pronounce all these, by the way. Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. Okay? Now, here's where it gets fun to me. Sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Riphath, Togarmah. I want you to keep that one in mind. Ashkenaz. Anybody ever heard of Ashkenazi Jews? You ever heard that term? An Ashkenazi Jew? We'll get there. Sons of Javan, Elishah, Tarshish, Kittim, Dodanim. Now, where do the people of Japheth end up? Well, here you go. Turkey, upper part. So basically, from the steppes of Russia all the way to the Iberian Peninsula. Okay? Hate to use the term European lighter skinned. Okay? So there's the basis of the European nations come from Japheth. Okay? Does that all make sense? Again, keep Ashkenaz in your mind. Now to Shem. So where do the descendants of Shem? Arphaxad, Elam. Man, there's another bunch you got to watch out for. The Elamites, trouble all the way through. Asher, Arphaxad, Lud, Aram. So Arphaxad, Aram, very important. Then you got Salah, Eber, Peleg, Joktan, and then all these dudes. I won't go through all of them. And here are the sons of Aram. Aram, very important here. Uz, Hul, Gether, Mash. Again, there'll be a test on this. So where are the people of Shem? Where do they go? We're going to look at also on a map where this all starts from, okay? So Shem, basically from the Persian Gulf, this would again be the Arabian Peninsula, Sinai Peninsula, Egypt. So they are in this land here, which today is from Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, backside of Turkey, and then there's Iran, and Iraq is over here. So they basically took care of this whole area here. Now there's a little town right here called Ur. Ever heard of Ur? Who's from Ur? Abraham, Ur of the Chaldeans. Guess what? Who one of the descendants of Shem is? Chaldean. He's the Chaldean. Okay? So Abraham is from the line of Shem, and he ends up in Ur. And here's Ur. Just for perspective, there's Jerusalem. So Abraham and all those descendants. Now you see that Shem does come down in here into Lebanon, into that land that we would call Israel, the Holy Land, into Jerusalem. But you can already see what's happening here, right? Where's Japheth? He's up there. He's the middle child. Nobody cares, right? So he's up here. Shem and Ham, there's this borderline right in here that is already under conflict. Okay?
Question.
Yes.
Barb.
Yep.
Where on that map, do they suppose the ark?
I'm glad you asked that. Okay, I'll get to that in just a second.
Okay.
Now, here's Ham. And I wanted to show you this one. I like this particular map because it tells you some things here. Cush. So Cush is Ethiopia. Mizraim is roughly translated later into the word Egypt. So Mizraim was one of the sons of Ham. Cush, Put, and Canaan. So guess where Cush ends up? Cush ends up down here. Mizraim, Egypt. Put over here in Libya. Canaan in what we call the Canaan land. Okay? You follow all of those all the way down through here, and you find all of these groups right here. These sound familiar? Sidon, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Arkites, the Sinites, Arvadites, the Zemarites, and Hamathite.
They're the ones that Israel took over when they went into the promised
Yeah,
land.
yeah, that's that big promised land battle every other day. It was between them and the sons of who? Ham.
Shem and Ham.
Shem and Ham. Okay, I do have a map that's going to answer your question here in just a second. There's always a map. So why is all that significant? Why is all that significant? Answer number one, birthright. That's the very first thing. Who can claim what? Now,
And the conflict started almost immediately.
Immediately. I mean, Noah lives for hundreds of years more. So they, at that point, Ham is cast out. You're cursed. You go away. And we'll show you why that map looks the way it does because of Ham being cast out. He's cast out of the land. And Noah makes promises to his sons. You'll have this land and you'll have that land and all that kind of stuff. And basically for Ham, he says, you have nothing. You've been cursed. You have no claim to anything. Now, who had claim to the entire known world at that time? Noah. Noah was the patriarch, so Noah had claim to everything he could put his eyeballs on. He was it. Does that make sense? I mean, he's the only human male, the oldest human male on the planet after the flood. He owns it all. And why is the other reason why he owns it all? Because God says, it's yours to deal with. And so who naturally gets the birthright from there? Who naturally gets all that the father lays out? The oldest, which would be Shem. Now, Shem's job after Noah dies is to distribute his father's wealth and all his father's lands to his other descendants. So he would have had responsibility to Japheth and Ham to distribute Noah's lands and his wealth or whatever. Okay? But the curse of Canaan, the sin of Ham and the curse of Canaan basically tells Ham, you get nothing. Nothing is promised to you. You are not owed anything. You have no right to anything. Nothing. So now you see that the conflict is not beginning with Ishmael and Isaac. Because now you see where all those people ended up and where we see where the conflict is coming from, the source of all this conflict. So the answer, number one, to why this is all significance is birthright. Answer number two, that curse. It's significant because of the curse. Who is to be the servant to whom? Again, we talked about, I don't want to answer to anybody else. I really don't. Nobody does. They really don't. And answer number 3, all of that migration, where they end up. Okay? And it's important because if was the promised land that God had before him, let me tell you something. Of the Chaldees and the Chaldeans in the time of Abraham was a prosperous, beautiful area. And it was near the Tigris and the Euphrates. It was in a good land, a fertile land. Jerusalem is not. I was talking to Tom Claiborne the other day with some of this stuff, and he was just like, yeah, there's some places around Jerusalem that have been and are kind of beautiful. The Gaza, it's a fertile plain down along the Mediterranean. Jerusalem is up on a ridge, and it's kind of hard to get to, and it's militarily significant, but that land is not necessarily the greatest land there ever was. Now, when the spies go looking into the land of Canaan, what do they see? A land flowing with milk and honey and the big grapes and all this kind of stuff. They see all that stuff, but in comparison, there were better lands. So the question is, why is this such a big deal about that particular chunk of land? The answers are right here. It has to do with the birthright, the curse, and the migration. It has to do with the promise, the covenant God had made with them. So I think that map we're talking about here would be just up in a second. He also said in verse 26, praise be to the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Shem. May God extend Japheth's territory. There again, this is him laying out the birthright, laying out who gets what. May Japheth live in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be the slave of Japheth. So the youngest is now the slave to the middle child too. Now, the other thing that you'll see is that there is that conflict beginning right there with the Semites and from down the line to Ashkenazah. Okay? Ashkenazah being basically the southern and eastern Europeans. Who would you call the southern and eastern Europeans? Well, you start in the Poles, the Russians, the Slavs, all of those. And where do you think the word Slav comes from? Slave. Okay? So there's going to be this back and forth between who is slave to who for thousands of years. And it all rolls back to that. Okay? So there's your answer. I knew it was coming. All right, so you guys know some of these lands. Remember, we've talked about them over here, all of these places here. And these got significant little events that happen. But all the way over here, you look up here in Armenia, which is the eastern part. This is up towards some of the former Soviet countries up here. And did you ever hear about the Armenian genocide? Have you any idea about the Armenian genocide? Look up that in history. I really would like for you to see that because there were the Turks, the Ottoman Turks, essentially wanted to eliminate, fully kill every Armenian off the planet in the early 1900s. It's part of the source and everything that goes into World War I. Any idea who the Armenians are? They're of the line of Japheth, but also, and many of them in the line of Ashkenazah. So, they're Jews. Well, it'd be like Hitler. It'd be like Hitler. But the Ottoman Turks wanted to eliminate the Ashkenazi Jews and the Armenians. Mom's cousin, his cousin, right? Cousin-in-law, her cousin's husband was born in Armenia, and the family had to basically try to survive all of that, and he ended up over here serving the United States Army in Korea, right? Okay, so that was some years later, but his family had to deal with the Armenian genocide. But anyway, so up in Armenia, which many will claim is still part of Turkey, but up here is they say Mount Ararat. Now, Mount Ararat was not Mount Ararat. It was an Ararat range. It was a range of mountains, like you say the Blue Ridge, okay? The Blue Ridge Mountains, or you say the Smokies. You could get a little bit more detail. There's a mountain range, and then among that mountain range is another smaller mountain range. So the Ararat Mountains is where the Bible tells us that the ark came to rest. That area is up there in the northeast part, probably just outside of Turkey on the Iranian-Turkish border. And there are some people who have been searching in that area and think they've found multiple places that have evidence of the ark. So you can see, if we look at that migration again, so Japheth and all his crew from here go out this way, right? Shem takes all of this area, and then Ham is cast off into these areas. And there's only one area in all that land that is even remotely decent, and it is the Nile Delta in Egypt, which is where one of his sons, Mizraim, eventually ends up, and that's Egypt. That's what he is eventually called, is Egypt. Okay? So the only land that Ham's descendants even get that's remotely decent is Egypt, which becomes a superpower at some point in time, but it takes 1,000 years for that to happen. All right? Yes?
It's maybe kind of an odd question.
My grandpa used to say there's no such thing as a dumb question, it's just dumb people asking them.
Yeah, right.
And I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's what my grandpa would say.
You mentioned earlier that Japheth went up into the
Europe, yeah.
And you said that his a little bit lighter skin. Were there different physical attributes
Yes.
with those three sons?
There-
Because you see
There were indeed.
a huge amount of
Yeah.
Yep.
variation.
Yep.
I got a question.
And I don't want to get off too far onto that, but if we know that Ham ends up in Africa, in that area, and we understand that of that lineage, the African people migrate down into Africa, we know that Ham was of darker skin. We know that Japheth had of a lighter skin and had a different eye color. There's some accounts in the Talmud and some other accounts that say that he had a lighter eye color than the other two. And then Shem, his descendants were often referred to as with a yellow skin. So that would be that Asian and Western Asian color, and they would have sometimes either brown or green eye. So if you look at the Israelis or Hebraic Jews, sometimes you will find them with a green eye or a darker eye, but a very yellowish, not yellowish, but we call it olive skin, but it's not exactly that. So what is your question?
Because the maps I find interesting.
Yeah.
Where did Noah build the ark? Do we know?
Noah was in Uz. Uz. We got Ur and Uz. So they had really complicated names back then, Ur and Uz. And so that would have been somewhere in here.
Okay.
Okay? And we won't get off because there's a whole bunch of words about how that all occurred and the different epics that are recorded in history. If you've ever heard of the Epic of Gilgamesh, yeah, there's all kinds of fun stuff there. Anyway, you guys know I'll get off in some sort of crazy tangents anyway. What did I lose here? Okay, we got that. Did I go through it already? Okay, all right.
Who had the olive skin? Was it Shem's?
Yeah, that would be Shem. Oliver or yellow. There's a rough history that says that they're referred to as yellow on occasion. That the entire people referred to as yellow.
So they would have had different moms?
No, because we find out there was only one wife
Yeah.
of Noah.
But,
Yeah.
But,
Okay. With that being said, if I may, let's point directly to Danielle. The two girls, the two youngest girls. Other than the fact you know that they're related, it'd be really hard to tell. So genetics speak to that. I mean, my sister has brown hair and light eyes. My brother has light brown hair, and I have a red beard. Okay, so we have dominant recessive genes that occur all throughout history, and so like my brother tans really, really well. I mean, he gets a very darker skin than I do. I'm more fair-skinned, and my sister is even more fair-skinned than I am. So you can see those variations all throughout individual families. So it wouldn't be that uncommon for that kind of thing to happen.
those just seemed extreme.
Yeah, but what happens is, so if you have somebody who has darker skin who goes into one area and stays in that area, the descendants are only going to do one thing. They're going to keep that dominant trait, and it's going to be more and more common for that dominant trait to be the dominant trait. And so the same thing with moving in, if you're separated, in that meantime, in between Noah and Abraham, we have the Tower of Babel, and we have the dispersion of languages and things like that. So that has a lot to do with it, and the fact that what nations were in that area when languages kind of came into play. And the majority of the languages that came out of the Tower of Babel were the Semite languages. So Japheth's crew would not have been at the Tower of Babel. So what we would call the European languages are not the Semite languages because they weren't there. They just weren't at the tower. Okay? And so the people of Ham, likely not there either because they were cast out. They weren't supposed to be there. Okay?
It was hard to get my mind, or hard for me to get my mind wrapped around. You had Noah and then his 3 sons.
Uh-huh.
And from them, we populated all of Africa, all of China, all of India, all
Yeah.
of Europe.
Yeah.
United States, from 3 families.
Right. But we're also talking about 500-600 years before Noah's gone.
Right.
And then he lived a bunch of, Ham, Shem, and Japheth all lived long lives and you saw the list of their descendants, and that's just their male descendants that we know of. They're recorded. It's very likely that they would have had other wives and children. We record generally the children that they would have had with their main wife.
Well, at that point, they're marrying sisters.
Yeah.
And we all come from inbred.
Yeah.
genetic-
But, which again, that goes to your genetic question, is if you're marrying within the family and within a trait, you're going to just keep propagating those traits. So if one person is darker skinned and you marry your sister who's darker skinned, you're going to get darker skin. If it's lighter skinned or blue eyes or green eyes or whatever it is, the probability of having those things increases exponentially. Okay. Wow.
At what point, when these 3 brothers got split up
Mm-hmm.
due to the birthright, did they all become enemies at that point?
Japheth, no. There's rarely a conflict between the tribes of Japheth and Shem. And quite honestly, Ham. Again, I say it this way, he was the middle child. They're up in Europe. Nobody wanted to go to Europe. Which is crazy because it was beautiful, fertile land. It had the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea and, the steppes of the Ural Mountains. And I mean, you go all the way to Italy and to Spain and France and along the Mediterranean coast and Greece. All of Greece. Japheth. So that's where we get basically the Greek descendants as well. And so in that you get variations again, what we're talking about. So if you look at a Greek and you look at a Pole, someone from Poland, they're not that far apart distance-wise, but the fact that they're different tribes or different sons of Japheth, they look different. And so that's the source of that. So it's a great study, and if you've ever done Punnett squares, it has to do with the hybrids and the different traits of different things and stuff like that. Okay, sorry, geeking out. So there you go. All right. So with that being said, you understand now that we have not even gotten to Abraham yet, and you can already see a huge source of all this. Now, from this, I will get to the point where the claim, when we get up to Ishmael and Isaac, the conflict there, it adds to the conflict, and you'll see why that conflict is there. It's not, again, the same answers apply when we get there between the issue with Isaac and Ishmael. And then the reason why a certain group of people, for example, like the Muslims, don't like the Jews has to do with those same 3 answers. And the Muslims don't like it because they initially, with made-up genealogies, and here again I'm already teaching the lesson, with made-up genealogies, try to connect Muhammad, the prophet, to Ishmael. And the fact of the matter is, Muhammad is not related to Ishmael. period. He is related to, anybody want to take a guess? Ham. Because those are the Arabs, not the Arabs, but the Yemeni Arabs. And those are descendants of Ham. The Yemeni Arabs are down in the Arabian Peninsula, and they never connected with the people who were Semite-Arabs, who were descendants of Shem. The Arabs are descendants of Shem, but not these Arabs that we call Arabs. See that? You see how things have been misconstrued over the years? When we say Arabs, we think of a whole different group of people, right? Look here, Arabia, okay? And I'll show you on a map where like Mecca is, and the claims of Mecca being built by Abraham and Ishmael. There's no geological, there's no archaeological evidence that Mecca was built until the 5th or 4th century BC. Didn't even exist. And there's a possibility it didn't even exist until after the time of Christ. But they lay claim to that it was already 2,000 years old. Abraham is like 2100 BC. And they're laying claim to the fact that at about 2000 BC that Mecca and the Kaaba was built by Abraham and Ishmael. And there's no evidence, there's no archaeological evidence at all that Ishmael was ever even in Mecca or that Mecca existed. So there's a whole bunch of other genealogy that goes into it. But just let me clarify by saying there's no genealogical, there's no geographical, there's no archaeological evidence that connects Muhammad to Ishmael. But there is archaeological, there is geographical and genealogical evidence that links Muhammad and his people to Ham. Okay? In fact, Muhammad said in one of the writings, when they started doing his genealogy, because they were deifying Muhammad, that he said, you're not to go any further in my genealogy. He forbid it to go any further in his genealogy than the 13th descendant, which is Ma'ad. And Ma'ad is not related to Ishmael. And then later on he said, okay, you can't go any further than 20th. And then they looked at that. That was following a hadith that showed that they made up a genealogy. They came up with this new genealogy. And the reason why they know it was a new genealogy is it was written in Arabic. The genealogy was written in Arabic, not any of the current writings, the styles. It was written by the Yemenis. The people from Yemen wrote the genealogy. So it would have been, no, it would have been the descendants of Ham.
Ham.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it would have been the descendants of Ham.
I'm thinking Ham.
Yeah.
Said Shem.
And I'll try to find, let me see if I can find a map. Of course I can find a map. That ain't it. What's that? No, that ain't going to do it either. I'll find it. Yeah, one more. No, that's the sign. Yes, that will do it. That will do it. Okay, this is the Sinai. Okay? And so, if you look across here to the Arabian desert, this area right here is Yemen. Mecca is up around here. Okay? There's no evidence that any descendant of Shem ever went any further north than Kadesh Barnea. There's no evidence that they ever went any further than that. In fact, there are 3 other towns right through here that we can link multiple people connected to Muhammad, or not Muhammad, but Shem, that's where they lived. They went no further south than that. All the descendants of Ham would have been from here to here. And so the people who lived in what is currently Yemen, and they were referred to as Yemenis even back then, because they were a descendant of Ham, and one of the descendants of Ham was Yemen. So they lived here. All right? So the people who built Mecca were from Yemen, and they were spice traders. And the spices in Yemen were better than the spices in Mecca. There was only one spice in Mecca that was of any value. I'll let somebody just take a guess what it was. You're probably not going to. What did you say?
Cinnamon, anise?
No,
Cinnamon?
no, no.
Some kind of poison?
Balsam, where you get balsamic. That was their only valuable spice whatsoever. And it was a near worthless trade. So the fact that they called Mecca this trade center, this center of all living things, Mecca was not that. It was in a bad valley. Mecca is just, there's nothing about Mecca other than the fact that Muhammad laid claim to it that makes it special at all. Nothing. At all. But Muhammad thinks it was. All right, so we are now at 10 till. That was the one session that I wanted to get through. I made sure I tried to get the information concise so I could just get through that information. And I wanted us to get to that idea of where the origin of this conflict really starts with. Does this make sense? I know it's a lot of information, and I rattled off a bunch of descendants and all that kind of fun stuff. And you could spend weeks just looking at genealogies. But I want you to keep Ashkenazi in your brain. And Ashkenazi is connected to Japheth. Okay? So Ashkenazi, if you talk about Ashkenazi Jews, they were likely descendants of the Jews that we would find in Poland. Remember when Hitler starts going through Europe and grabbing Jews? Those are Ashkenazi Jews. Okay? Now, the original descendants of Japheth were not monotheistic. They took on monotheism later on. They took on the God of Abraham later on, which is not unheard of, but that was the case. Consider the descendants of Japheth are Greek, Romans, people like that. Okay, so they were polytheistic. Many of them took on Judaism later on. And when it comes to Shem, I want you to think of that line, the Semites, and you include Aramaic, Arabic, and Hebrew in your languages for the Semites. So when people talk about Arabic and how, well, it's Arabic, so we hate the Jews, right? It's anti-Semitism. You're anti-yourself, okay, because you're a Semite. That's the big, because they will say, no, we're not. And the fact of the matter is the genealogies are very clear. You have no choice but to be Semite. You're from the line of Shem. And the only reason why they have to do that, they have to lay claim to this, is because every one of them lays claim to father who? Abraham. And Abraham was a direct descendant of Shem. So if you lay claim to Father Abraham, you have to lay claim to Shem. So if you're going to make that claim, that's the problem. They can't get back to Ishmael as their descendant, because if they claim Ishmael, they have to claim Abraham. If they claim Abraham, they have to lay claim to Shem, which makes them Semites. So there's a big fight, and it's all over those three things that we talked about. Yes, ma'am.
So the Muhammad that my student prays to every day,
Mm-hmm.
it is the same Muhammad.
Prophet Muhammad, yeah.
That's what I thought. I just want to clarify that.
Yeah, and there were three other prophets that Muhammad slaughtered. They were trying to basically create their own group of people too, and Muhammad came along and just slaughtered them. Yeah.
So I'm reading here that about Mecca,
Uh-huh.
that it's claimed to be the birthplace of Muhammad.
Yeah. It's not.
It's not.
No.
It's a lie.
Yep. I'm going to give you some resources to look at. Daniel, I'll think of it. I'll give you some a resource list later on to watch some YouTube videos on it. He does a 6-part series on the question, is Muhammad related to Ishmael, a descendant of Ishmael?
Send it out.
I will. I'll make a whole list and send it out. There's some really good videos out there. Next week, we'll talk about the Abrahamic epic, and then we'll start talking about Canaan, Philistines, and Palestine, and how they are not connected. Bum, bum, bum. Okay? But yes, Mecca is a made-up center. I mean, it's an actual city, and it did things, but it is not the center of life that the Muslims claim or Muhammad claimed.
Was it before Muhammad, or was it?
Muhammad's like 670, something like that, 700
Okay.
AD.
when did it exist? After Muhammad, that he would have maybe made it?
When did Mecca exist?
Yeah.
5th century. AD or BC? AD or BC? BC, I believe.
Okay,
So 1,000 years,
before.
roughly, before. But there's even some possibilities that Mecca didn't exist until the time of Christ.
Yeah.
So there's not a huge amount of
Yeah.
archaeological evidence that proves that Mecca is. There's nothing that proves that it was 2,000 years before
Someone
Christ.
said, here's a crummy place to live, let's claim it.
Right, right, and make it the center of all things.
Yeah.
Now, there's another thing that is really interesting. If you look at the Muslim mosques, the praying, the area where they're supposed to pray is supposed to point towards Mecca. And if you look at the majority of those places, they have to alter that prayer little cove to point toward Mecca because the original mosques did not point towards Mecca. Where do you think they pointed towards? Kadesh Barnea, not Mecca. So they had to actually change the angle of everything in those early mosques to go, we're supposed to point towards Mecca. And they didn't. So we either got to tear the building down and rebuild it to point towards Mecca or, yeah. So the center of their worship was not originally Mecca until Muhammad and his followers go, it's all got to be Mecca.
I can attest to that, her prayer road has to go a certain angle.
Yep.
Is Abraham, was he Abram first?
Yes, he was Abram first. And we'll talk about that. And Abram means father, essentially, or exalted father, things like that. Abraham means father of many. So you got Abba, Abraham. Abram is simply exalted father. Abraham is father of many.
I'm just sitting here thinking, why was he called Abraham instead of Abraham?
Right. Good point. That's good. I like that. All right, any other questions? We got to get out of here, but
Thank you.
hopefully I didn't just make your brain just a scramble, but
It is, but it's, see, I'm sitting.
The visuals all help.
okay.